Imagine for a moment you are a refugee. Just think what it would be like, not having a home, or not even knowing where your next meal would come from. You might worry about whether or not your children would go to bed once again with an empty stomach. Just think what it would be like, constantly being on the run for persecution. And just imagine someone writes a letter telling you to rejoice in the hard times you're going through. How would you react to that? James, the brother of Jesus, writes to the early Jewish believers, telling them that God has a plan in the trials that come into our lives. The passage I've selected for today is James 1, 2 through 4. It says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that ye may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." James wrote his book to the early Jewish believers who had been scattered all over the Roman Empire because of persecution. One of the reasons the book of James was written was so that James could encourage the believers who were in the middle of so many different trials. They were basically just refugees who had been driven from their homes by the threat of persecution. James is telling us in this passage that we should rejoice in trials because God uses them to produce patience and complete us. When trials come, many people choose to blame God. Others, they sit around like the trials they're going through, make them absolutely miserable. Maybe it's the death of a loved one. Or it could be the loss of a job. Maybe it's a family that's been torn in two. So what should we do when trials like these come? Well, in this passage, James talks about two different aspects of trials. First off, he talks about the response to trials. Secondly, he talks about the purpose behind the trials. Let's take a look at the response to trials. James talks about the response to trials in verse 2. He says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials." We should rejoice in the trials. Last summer, I met a woman that absolutely amazed me. She was a woman that she always had a smile on her face. She was the type of person that she stuck out in the crowd. She had such a love and a passion for serving the Lord, and a joy that overflowed into everything that she did. I found out the day after I met this woman, she's a widow. She was a middle-aged woman raising 4 kids on her own because her husband was one of the brave men that 9/11 rushed into one of the burning Twin Towers, never to come out. It amazed me how a woman that had been through so much could still have such a joy in life. That's how we should be. No matter what the trial is, no matter how big or how small it is, we need to rejoice. It's interesting if you look here. James is telling us to rejoice in the trials, not for them. I recently read a quote that I really liked. It said, "The happiest of people don't necessarily have the best of everything. They just make the most of everything that comes along their way." That's exactly what James is talking about here. He's not saying because trials come we should rejoice, but he's saying when those trials do come, and they will come, we should count it all joy, or consider it all joy. Now you might be sitting there scratching your head saying, "I don't get it. Why should I rejoice in the hard times that I'm going through?" Well, to answer that question, we have to look at the purpose behind the trials. James talks about the purpose behind the trials in verses 3 and 4. Verse 3 says, "Knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience." God uses trials in our lives to produce patience. All throughout the Bible, you see numerous examples of individuals that God put through trials. There's Joseph, who is a young boy, was sold into slavery by his own brothers. How about David? David was heir to the throne of Israel, and yet he spent years on the run from Saul in fear of his life. Then there's Daniel. As a young boy, Daniel was dragged off into Babylonian captivity, and we're told that even into the later years of his life, he continued to face trials as he was thrown into the lion's den at almost age 90. These are all men that God placed in positions of leadership, but God also took them through trials. They showed patience, they showed endurance, and God used those trials to mold them into the men that he wanted them to be. God also uses trials to complete us. Verse 4 says, "But let patience have its perfect work, that ye may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." Now when James talks about perfection here, he's not talking about a moral, sinless perfection. He's talking about spiritual maturity. How that first, God uses those trials to produce patience, And then if we let him, he uses those to help us to grow and mature spiritually. Let me tell you about a boy named Taylor. 2 years ago, my sophomore year in high school, I traveled to Long Island, New York on a mission trip. We were there to help run a Christian day camp. And I thought, go in, teach a couple Bible lessons, teach a couple verses, have fun with the kids. How hard can it be? My group started showing up. They were fun, they were energetic, they were excited about the week. And then Taylor showed up. Taylor was an absolute terror to our group. He didn't want to be there. He wanted to do what he wanted to do, when he wanted to do it, and he wasn't going to listen to us no matter what. So we kind of walked away from that first day just kind of shaking our head. We thought, second day will come, we'll rebound. So the second day came, and it was twice as bad. We walked away from that second day completely beaten down, defeated, discouraged. We wanted to quit. You know what? In that week, that blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy who caused us so much trouble, he bowed his head and he asked Christ to come in and be his Savior. Looking back, at the time, that was one of the hardest weeks that I had ever been through. But God taught me so much through it. That's why God brings trials in our lives, to help us to grow and mature spiritually. Now let's say you were to walk into a nursery. There on the floor is a baby, squirming and laughing. That'd probably be pretty cute. But let's say next Sunday, you walk into your church nursery, and there, sprawled out on the floor, squirming and laughing like a little baby, is an old man. That would be rather strange. You know what? It's sad to say, spiritually speaking, many Christians are still stuck in the nursery because they've let misery, anger, and bitterness towards their trials stunt their Christian growth. Until we realize that God brings trials into our lives to help us to grow and mature spiritually, and in turn rejoice in that, we're not going to grow spiritually. There's a purpose behind the trials that come into our lives. And our response to those trials should be rejoicing. Have you ever driven down the road and come upon a construction zone with a sign that says, "Men at work"? There they are on the side of the road with their jackhammers carried up the road, or maybe they're running a steamroller over the freshly paved road. I can't stand construction zones because I can't go as fast as usual. I know it's necessary, but it's a pain and an inconvenience to go through. But in the same way, when we go through trials, imagine a sign that says, "God at work." Sometimes it seems like the orange barrels of life go off forever. It's definitely hard at times. But too often, we view those trials as an inconvenience or a pain, or that it's just slowing us down in life. But what about you? The last time a trial came into your life, how did you react? When it feels like things are crumbling under the weight of a pounding jackhammer, how do you react? When it feels like your life has been completely run over by a steamroller, how do you react? Do you complain? You might get you down. Or do you view that as a time where God is at work? Are you rejoicing in your trials?
Thank you.